I used to believe that growing old was a blessing. My mother always said, "Eleanor, with age comes wisdom." But she never mentioned how with age also comes vulnerability. She never warned me that the ones you trust the most could betray you in your moment of weakness. My name is Eleanor Mitchell. I'm 65 years old, though some days my bones feel a century old, especially on rainy mornings like this one. The constant patter against the window of my small room at Pine Grove Assisted Living reminds me of the tears I've shed since arriving here 3 months ago. 3 months that feel like an eternity. I run my fingers along the smooth edge of the windowsill, feeling the cold seeping through the glass. Outside, the manicured lawn of Pine Grove stretches toward a line of oak trees, their branches swaying in the Massachusetts wind. It's a pretty place, I suppose, if you choose to be here, but I didn't choose. That choice was made for me by my son, Richard. The memory of that night still haunts me. I'd taken my usual sleeping pill, prescribed for the insomnia that had plagued me since my husband Frank's death 2 years ago. I remember drifting off in my own bed, in my own home, the colonial-style house on Maple Street that Frank and I had purchased in 1985 for $78,500. The house where we raised our children, where we celebrated Christmases and birthdays, where Frank took his last breath holding my hand. I was disoriented when I woke up. The ceiling wasn't mine. The bed wasn't mine. The antiseptic smell wasn't the lavender sachet I keep under my pillow. I heard unfamiliar voices, saw unfamiliar faces. "Mrs. Mitchell, welcome to Pine Grove. Your son has arranged everything for your comfort." But as the fog of medication cleared, I remembered something, a conversation, or rather fragments of one, heard through the haze of impending sleep, Richard's voice, uncharacteristically cold. "Let's take her while she's sleeping. It'll be easier that way." And the voice of his wife, Diane. "Are you sure the papers will hold up? She didn't actually sign anything." I tried to leave that first day. I really did. I got as far as the front desk before a gentle but firm hand guided me back. "Mrs. Mitchell, you can't leave without discharge papers. Your son has medical power of attorney. He's made all the arrangements." Power of attorney. I never signed any such document, never even discussed it. Frank and I had our wills prepared, of course. We weren't irresponsible people. Our estate was to be divided equally between Richard and his younger sister, Sarah, who lives in California. But I had never, would never, sign away my autonomy. Not while I was still of sound mind, and I am of sound mind, despite what the paperwork says. The first week, I called Richard daily. His responses were always the same. "Mom, it's for your own good. You can't live alone anymore." "You're having memory issues. Remember when you left the stove on? Remember when you got lost coming home from the grocery store?" Isolated incidents, exaggerated beyond proportion. Yes, I'd left a pot of water boiling once when the phone rang. It was Richard himself calling, ironically. And yes, I'd taken a wrong turn driving home from the new Whole Foods that had replaced my familiar Stop and Shop. But these weren't signs of dementia. They were the normal mishaps of a woman adjusting to life alone after 43 years of marriage. "The house is too much for you to manage," Richard insisted during his first visit to Pine Grove 2 weeks after my arrival. He sat across from me in the communal living room, refusing to meet my eyes, his fingers nervously tapping on his knee. "This place is nice. They take good care of you here." "I don't need to be taken care of," I told him, keeping my voice low but firm. Other residents sat nearby, some watching television, others engaged in card games or conversations with visitors. "I want to go home, Richard, to my house." "It's not your house anymore, Mom." His words hit me like a physical blow. "We've sold it. The closing was yesterday." I felt the blood drain from my face. "You? What? How could you sell my house? I never authorized that." Richard pulled out a folder from his leather briefcase. always the businessman. My son. He slid a document across the coffee table. You gave me power of attorney last year, remember? After Dad died. You said you didn't want to deal with the paperwork and finances anymore. I stared at the document. At the signature that looked like mine, but wasn't. I never signed this. Never. This is a forgery, I whispered, looking up at my son, this stranger wearing Richard's face. He had the decency to look uncomfortable, at least. Mom, don't start with this again. The doctor said you might have periods of confusion, of not remembering things you've done. It's why you're here. What doctor? I want to see this doctor. I want a second opinion. I want my own doctor, Dr. Levine, to examine me. Dr. Levine retired last year. Don't you remember? Dr. Whitman took over his practice. He's the one who recommended Pine Grove. Another lie. I'd seen Dr. Levine for my annual physical just 3 months before Frank died. He was younger than me, in his early 60s, with no plans for retirement. As Richard spoke, the pieces began to fall into place. The hasty visit from an unfamiliar doctor the week after Frank's funeral. The questions about my memory, my daily routine. The way Richard had insisted on being present during the entire examination. The prescription for sleeping pills that I hadn't wanted but Richard convinced me would help with grief. I looked at my son, my only son, my firstborn, and for the first time in his 42 years of life, I felt afraid of him. Why? I asked simply. Richard looked around, making sure nobody was listening too closely. He leaned forward. The house sold for $875,000, Mom. That's a lot of money just sitting there, especially when you don't need it anymore. All your needs are covered here. My needs, I repeated, ice in my veins. And what about what I want? What about the home Frank and I built? What about my garden? My friends, my life? You weren't managing, Mom. You were letting the place fall apart. The property taxes alone were eating away your savings. This was another lie. Frank had been meticulous about our finances. We had our mortgage paid off by the time Richard started college. We had savings, investments, Frank's pension from 35 years at the insurance company, and my own retirement from teaching elementary school for nearly 3 decades. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we were comfortable, secure. Where's the money from the house? I demanded. It's being managed for your care. His eyes shifted away from mine. Richard had never been a good liar as a child. Some things hadn't changed. I want to see my bank statements. I want to talk to my lawyer. Mom, this is exactly why we had to make these arrangements. You get confused, you get paranoid. The doctor said, I don't care what this doctor I've never properly met said. I want to leave. Now. Richard stood up, straightening his tie, a nervous habit he'd had since high school. I have to go. I have a meeting. I'll visit again next week and hopefully you'll be more settled then. He left without hugging me goodbye. My son, who I'd rocked through colic, who I'd nursed through chickenpox, who I'd stayed up countless nights helping with science projects and college applications, walked away, leaving me imprisoned in a place I never chose to be. That night, I lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, no longer trusting the sleeping pill the night nurse offered with a smile. My mind raced, searching for allies, for a way out. Sarah, my daughter, lived in San Francisco, busy with her job as an environmental lawyer. We spoke weekly by phone, but Richard had always been the one to handle family matters back east. Would she believe me over her brother? Would she even be able to help from across the country? Frank's brother, my brother-in-law James, lived in Florida. We exchanged Christmas cards, but little else since Frank's passing. My own sister had died of breast cancer a decade ago. My circle of friends, mostly fellow teachers, had their own health issues, their own families to worry about. I felt utterly alone. But underneath the fear and confusion, something else was building. Anger, determination. I hadn't spent 65 years on this earth to be discarded and deceived by my own child. I hadn't taught generations of young minds to think critically, only to accept lies without question. I'd been a fighter my whole life, standing up to school boards for better resources for my students, marching for equal pay in the 1970s, caring for Frank through his final battle with cancer without a single complaint. And I would fight now, for my freedom, for justice, for my home. The next morning, I approached the activities director, a pleasant young woman named Jenna, who always wore brightly colored scrubs decorated with cartoon characters. Jenna, I need to use a computer with internet access. It's important. She looked surprised but nodded. Of course, Mrs. Mitchell. We have 2 computers in the library for resident use. Do you know how to use one? I can help you get started. I taught computer basics to 3rd graders for 15 years, dear. I think I can manage. I softened my words with a smile. Rule 1 of my new plan: appear cooperative, pleasant, unthreatening. The Pine Grove Library was small but well stocked, with large print books and comfortable chairs. The computer station sat in the corner, relatively private. Perfect. I logged in using the generic resident access code Jenna provided and opened a browser. First, I searched for Dr. Levine. Just as I thought, his practice was still active. No retirement. I wrote down the office phone number on a slip of paper I'd taken from the reception desk. Next, I looked up Massachusetts laws regarding power of attorney, guardianship, and elder rights. I might be considered elderly by some standards, but I'd always kept my mind sharp. The information was overwhelming at first, but I took notes, focusing on key points. In Massachusetts, for a power of attorney to be valid, it must be signed voluntarily by a competent adult and properly witnessed and notarized. I never remembered signing such a document. Never. I searched for elder law attorneys in Boston, writing down several names and numbers. Then, covering my tracks, I spent some time looking at gardening websites and recipes, in case anyone checked the browsing history. Back in my room, I faced my next challenge: making private phone calls. Residents were allowed to have cell phones, but mine had mysteriously disappeared during my transfer to Pine Grove. The facility had communal phones in the hallways, but conversations there could be easily overheard. I needed an ally inside Pine Grove, someone with a phone I could borrow, and hopefully a conscience. I found her in Maria, one of the nursing assistants who helped with morning care. Maria was in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She'd been born in the Dominican Republic, she'd told me, and had worked at Pine Grove for nearly 15 years. Maria, I said quietly, as she helped me organize my closet one morning, may I ask you something in confidence? She looked at me carefully, then nodded. Of course, Mrs. Mitchell. I need to make some private calls. It's very important. Is there any way you could help me? Maria's expression remained neutral, but her eyes held a question. The phones in the hallway aren't private enough, I finished for her. What I need to discuss, it can't be overheard. She was quiet for a moment, folding a sweater with methodical precision. Many residents here, she finally said, they are confused, they imagine things. The doctors, the families, they know what's best. And many residents are here completely voluntarily, with loving families who truly want what's best for them, I replied. But Maria, I'm not confused. I was brought here against my will. My son has taken my house, my money, my freedom, and I need help to prove it. Maria studied my face. I met her gaze steadily. My mother, she said finally. She lived with me until she died at 92. In my country, we do not send our parents away unless there is no choice. She reached into her pocket and discreetly slipped me a prepaid cell phone. I keep this for emergencies. You can use it today. Return it to me tomorrow during morning care. Be careful, If they find it, I understand. Thank you, Maria. You're a good daughter. After Maria left, I waited until the midday activity hour, when most residents would be in the community room for bingo. I locked my door, one small dignity they still allowed us, and made my first call to Dr. Levine's office. "This is Eleanor Mitchell," I told the receptionist. "I'm a patient of Dr. Levine's. I need to speak with him about my medical records." After a brief wait, Dr. Levine came on the line. "Mrs. Mitchell, how are you? It's been several months since your last appointment." "Yes, and apparently in that time you retired and I developed dementia," I said dryly. "I beg your pardon? I haven't retired." "I know. Dr. Levine, I'm in a difficult situation. I've been placed in an assisted living facility based on a diagnosis I don't believe I received from you. Did you ever diagnose me with dementia or cognitive impairment of any kind?" The pause on the line stretched. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'd really need to see you in person to discuss your health matters." "I understand, but please, just answer this one question. It's important." Another pause. "No, Mrs. Mitchell. I have never diagnosed you with any form of dementia or cognitive impairment. Your last physical showed you to be in excellent health for your age, with no concerning cognitive symptoms." Relief washed over me. "Thank you. That's what I thought. One more question. Did you refer me to a Dr. Whitman?" "I don't know any Dr. Whitman in our practice network." I thanked him and ended the call. One piece of confirmation. Next, I called one of the elder law attorneys whose information I'd written down. A woman named Rebecca Goldstein. "Miss Goldstein, my name is Eleanor Mitchell. I'm currently being held at Pine Grove Assisted Living against my will, based on what I believe is a fraudulent power of attorney document. I need legal help immediately." "That's a serious allegation, Mrs. Mitchell," the attorney responded, her voice cautious but interested. "Can you provide more details?" I laid out my situation as concisely as possible. The night I was taken from my home while medicated. The document I supposedly signed but had no memory of signing. The sale of my house without my consent. The mysterious doctor who had apparently diagnosed me with memory issues. "Mrs. Mitchell, if what you're saying is accurate, there are several potential legal violations here. Elder abuse, fraud, possibly forgery. Are you able to come to my office for a consultation?" "That's part of the problem. I'm essentially not allowed to leave without my son's permission, and I have no access to transportation." "I see. In cases like this, I sometimes make facility visits. Would it be possible for me to come see you at Pine Grove, posing as a friend or relative perhaps?" "Yes," I said, hope rising in my chest for the first time in months. "That would work. They don't restrict visitors." We arranged for Miss Goldstein to visit the following afternoon as my niece. After ending that call, I made one more to my daughter Sarah in California. "Mom?" Sarah sounded surprised to hear from me. "Is everything okay? This isn't your usual number." "No, everything is not okay." I kept my voice low, aware that someone could knock on my door at any moment. "Sarah, I need you to listen carefully. Your brother has put me in an assisted living facility against my will. He sold the house and won't tell me where the money has gone. He's claiming I have dementia, which I don't." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Mom," Sarah finally said, her voice gentle in that way people use with children or the mentally unstable. "Richard told me about all this. He said you were having episodes of confusion and paranoia, that you'd become unable to care for yourself after Dad died." My heart sank. "And you believed him without speaking to me first?" "He said the doctors recommended limiting upsetting conversations. That's why I haven't called as much. He said you were settling in well." Do I sound confused to you right now, Sarah? Do I sound paranoid? Or do I sound like the mother who raised you, who has all her faculties intact? I could hear her breathing on the line, thinking. Richard said you'd be convincing when you were having good days. That's how dementia works sometimes. Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, I said, using my teacher voice, the one that had quieted classrooms of rowdy 8-year-olds for decades. I taught you to think critically, to question, to not accept something just because someone in authority told you it was true. I'm asking you to use those skills now. What does Richard have to gain by lying? She asked, but I could hear the doubt creeping into her voice. $875,000 from the sale of the house for starters, plus whatever is in my accounts that he now controls. Sarah, I've contacted an elder law attorney. She's coming to meet with me tomorrow. All I'm asking is that you keep an open mind until we have more facts. Another long pause. Okay, Mom, I'll try. I have a big case right now, but I can fly out next weekend, maybe. It wasn't the immediate support I'd hoped for, but it was something. Thank you, Sarah. I love you. Love you too, Mom. Stay well. I returned Maria's phone the next morning as promised, thanking her with my eyes. Then I waited anxiously for my appointment with the attorney. Rebecca Goldstein arrived precisely at 2 p.m., professionally dressed in a navy pantsuit, carrying a leather portfolio. She played the role of concerned niece perfectly, greeting me with a warm hug while whispering, "I'm recording our conversation with a device in my purse. Is that okay?" I nodded slightly against her shoulder. We sat in one of the private visiting rooms, a small space designed to look like a living room, but with the same institutional feel as the rest of Pine Grove. So, she began once we were alone. I need to assess a few things first, if you don't mind. Standard questions to establish cognitive capacity. Of course. She proceeded with questions about the current date, the president, simple arithmetic, recent events. I answered everything correctly. Now, she said, tell me about the power of attorney document your son claims you signed. I never signed it, at least not knowingly. The signature looks similar to mine, but it isn't mine. And I certainly never agreed to give Richard that kind of control over my affairs. Do you have a copy of the document? No. He showed it to me once but wouldn't leave it with me. Miss Goldstein nodded, taking notes. We can subpoena it. What about the doctor who allegedly diagnosed you with cognitive issues? A Dr. Whitman, whom I met once briefly after my husband's funeral. My regular doctor, Dr. Levine, confirms he never diagnosed me with any cognitive impairment and doesn't know any Dr. Whitman. And the house sale? Completed without my knowledge or consent, using the fraudulent power of attorney. Sold for $875,000, money which I have no access to or information about. The attorney looked up from her notes, her expression grim but determined. Mrs. Mitchell, based on what you've told me, we have grounds for immediate legal action. Massachusetts has strong elder protection laws. We can file for an emergency hearing to challenge the guardianship, request a legitimate medical evaluation, and potentially freeze any assets that remain from the house sale. Hope and fear battled within me. How quickly can we act, and what will happen to me in the meantime? I can file the emergency petition tomorrow. However, these cases can still take time to work through the system. As for your current situation, she hesitated. Honestly, once your son is served with papers, he'll know you're fighting back. Things could become more restrictive here. My mind raced. I thought of Maria, who had helped me once but might face consequences for further involvement. I thought of Jenna, who seemed kind but ultimately reported to the administration. I had few allies here, and if Richard decided to increase my medication or transfer me to a more restrictive facility before the court could intervene. Is there any way, I asked carefully, that I could leave here now, today, before the papers are filed? Miss Goldstein's expression was conflicted. Legally, without a court order invalidating the current guardianship, helping you leave could be considered kidnapping. However, She lowered her voice. She lowered. If you were to leave of your own accord, check into a hotel perhaps, and then contact me. That would be a different matter. I have no money, no ID. They've taken everything. She thought for a moment. I can advance you some funds as your legal representative. As for identification, do you have your Medicare card? Anything with your name on it? I shook my head, then paused. Wait. In my personal items, they let me keep my library card. It has my photo on it. That's something, at least. Mrs. Mitchell, what you're considering is risky. If caught leaving without authorization, your son could use it to strengthen his case that you need supervision. And if I stay, I risk being drugged into compliance or moved somewhere worse before I have my day in court. I straightened my shoulders. I've never been one to wait quietly for rescue, Miss Goldstein, not even at 65. A small smile crossed her face. I can see that. All right then, let's discuss how this might work. For the next 20 minutes, under the guise of looking at family photos in her portfolio, we formulated a plan. Miss Goldstein would leave but return at 8 p.m., parking in the far corner of the visitor's lot. Most staff changes happened at 7:30, creating a brief period of distraction. The side entrance near the garden was used for smoking breaks by staff and was often propped open. I can provide you with $500 in cash, she said. Enough for a few nights at a modest hotel. Use a different name when checking in. Cash only, no credit cards that could be traced. I'll contact you at the hotel tomorrow after filing the emergency petition. As she prepared to leave, she squeezed my hand. Are you certain about this, Mrs. Mitchell? It won't look good to simply disappear. I'm not disappearing, I said firmly. I'm escaping unlawful detainment. There's a difference. After she left, I returned to my room, heart pounding but mind clear. I had approximately 5 hours to prepare. I pulled out the small duffel bag I'd been allowed to keep and began methodically selecting essentials. A few changes of clothes, toiletries, my reading glasses, and the photograph of Frank I kept by my bed. I dressed in layers, knowing the April evening would be cool, and wore my most comfortable walking shoes. The hours crawled by. I ate dinner as usual in the dining room, making small talk with my table mates, giving no indication of my plans. I declined the evening medication from the nurse, claiming a stomach upset, not the first time I'd managed to avoid the sedatives they prescribed. At 7:45, I walked casually toward the garden, nodding to a distracted staff member who was helping a resident back to their room. The garden was empty in the gathering dusk, the air crisp with the scent of early spring flowers. I spotted the side door, propped open with a brick as predicted, cigarette butts scattered nearby. I waited, watching through the window, until I saw the shift-change commotion begin at the front desk. Then, with a deep breath, I walked through the door into the cool evening air. No alarms sounded. No one called after me. Moving as quickly as my arthritis would allow, I kept to the shadows along the hedge that bordered the parking lot. There, in the farthest corner, just as promised, was a dark blue sedan with Miss Goldstein at the wheel. I slipped into the passenger seat, breathing heavily not from exertion, but from the sheer audacity of what I was doing. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said, already pulling away from the parking space. "I have to say, you're not like most of my elderly clients." "I'm not like most people, period," I replied, watching Pine Grove recede in the side mirror. "And please, call me Eleanor." We drove to a modest motel on the outskirts of town, where Miss Goldstein helped me check in under the name Helen Martin. She gave me the promised cash and a prepaid phone. "I'll call you on this tomorrow after I file the petition. Try to rest. And Eleanor, be careful. Don't open the door for anyone but me." I nodded, suddenly exhausted by the day's events and emotions. "Thank you for believing me." Alone in the anonymous motel room, I sat on the edge of the bed, reality setting in. I was a 65-year-old woman with no ID, limited cash, estranged from her son, and technically a runaway from an elder care facility. And yet I felt more like myself than I had in months. Free to make my own decisions, even bad ones. Free to fight back. I thought of Richard, of the little boy who once held my hand so tightly at his first day of kindergarten, terrified to let go. When had he changed? Or had the capacity for this betrayal always been there, hidden beneath the surface? Was it Diane's influence, financial troubles I knew nothing about, or simply the corrupting belief that he knew better than me what was best for my life? I thought of Sarah, conflicted but at least willing to reconsider her brother's claims. Would she support me when she arrived? Or would Richard convince her too that I was delusional, that running away was proof of my instability? I thought of Frank, what he would say if he could see our family now, torn apart by greed and deceit. Frank, who had taught Richard to fish, to change a tire, to respect his elders. Frank, who would be heartbroken. Sleep came fitfully, disturbed by strange surroundings and racing thoughts. I woke early to sunlight filtering through thin curtains and the distant sound of traffic. I switched on the prepaid phone to see the time, 7:23 a.m. Miss Goldstein wouldn't call for hours yet. I couldn't stay cooped up in this room with only my anxious thoughts for company. I needed information. I needed to understand exactly what Richard had done and why. Using the phone and the motel's information binder, I called for a taxi to take me to the local library. The Westbrook Public Library opened at 9 a.m., a familiar sanctuary. I'd spent countless hours there over the years, both as a teacher researching materials for my classroom and personally as an avid reader. The taxi driver, a middle-aged man with a Boston accent thick enough to spread on toast, gave me a curious look in the rearview mirror. Kind of early for the library, isn't it? I like to be there when they open. Fewer distractions. I kept my answers vague, not inviting further conversation. At the library, I waited on a bench outside until the doors were unlocked by a familiar face, Margaret Simmons, the head librarian who had been there for as long as I could remember. "Eleanor?" she said as I walked in, surprise evident in her voice. "I haven't seen you in months. I heard you'd moved away after—" She trailed off delicately. "After Frank died," I finished for her. "Not exactly. It's a long story, Margaret. But I'm glad to see you. I need to use a computer, please." She studied me with the keen observation skills all good librarians possess. Noting perhaps my slightly rumpled appearance, the tension in my shoulders, but she just nodded. "Of course. You know where they are. Let me know if you need any help." At the computer terminal, I began my research in earnest. First, I searched property records for my address. Sure enough, 247 Maple Street had been sold 2 weeks ago to a couple named Brendan and Jessica Taylor for $875,000. The seller was listed as Richard Mitchell, acting as power of attorney for Eleanor Mitchell. Next, I searched Richard's name. This produced various results. His business profile as a financial advisor at Morgan Stanley, mentions in local business journals, his and Diane's names on charity gala attendance lists. Nothing immediately suspicious. On a hunch, I searched for Richard Mitchell financial troubles and Richard Mitchell gambling. Nothing relevant appeared. Then I remembered something. 3 years ago, Richard and Diane had talked about buying a vacation property on Cape Cod. They'd even shown Frank and me some listings for small cottages in Wellfleet. But they'd ultimately decided it wasn't the right time financially. I searched for property records in Wellfleet under both their names. Nothing. Then I tried Provincetown, Chatham, Orleans, all the popular Cape towns. Still nothing. On a whim, I expanded my search to more exclusive areas, Nantucket. Martha's Vineyard. And there it was. A property on Martha's Vineyard purchased by Richard and Diane Mitchell just 1 month ago. Purchase price, $795,000, almost exactly the amount from the sale of my house. I stared at the screen, the betrayal crystallizing into something tangible, undeniable. They had stolen my house, my home of nearly 40 years, to buy themselves a vacation property on Martha's Vineyard. Anger burned through me, clearing away any lingering doubts or confusion. This wasn't about my well-being or safety. This was theft, pure and simple, committed by my own son. I printed the property record and continued searching. I looked up the name of the doctor Richard had mentioned, Dr. Edward Whitman. There was indeed a physician by that name, but he specialized in geriatric psychiatry at a private practice known for catering to wealthy families. His office was in the same building as Richard's Morgan Stanley office. A coincidence? Unlikely. Next, I searched for information about contesting power of attorney documents, strengthening my understanding of what Miss Goldstein had told me. Massachusetts law was clear. For a power of attorney to be valid, the principal must have capacity at the time of signing, must sign voluntarily, and the document must be properly witnessed and notarized. I took notes, printed key information, and was preparing to log off when a news headline caught my eye. Financial advisor under investigation for elder fraud scheme. The article wasn't about Richard specifically, but about another advisor at his firm who had allegedly exploited elderly clients by convincing family members to establish guardianship, then siphoning assets through various means. The investigation had begun 3 months ago, around the time I was taken to Pine Grove. Could Richard be involved in a similar scheme? Was that why he had acted so suddenly before any potential investigation could reach him? Or had he simply seen his colleagues' methods and decided to adapt them for personal gain? I printed this article too, adding it to my growing file of evidence. Just as I was about to log off, the prepaid phone in my pocket vibrated. Miss Goldstein. "Eleanor, are you all right? I tried calling earlier." "I'm fine. I'm at the Westbrook Public Library doing some research. I found something important about Richard. That's actually why I'm calling. I've been doing some digging too before filing the petition. There's something you should know. Richard's financial advisory practice is under internal review at Morgan Stanley. Nothing public yet, but I have contacts. Apparently there are discrepancies in some client accounts, elderly clients. Specifically, the news hit me like a physical blow. So this wasn't just about my house. He's done this before. Potentially, which actually strengthens our case considerably. I filed the emergency petition. The court has scheduled a hearing for Monday morning. Today was Thursday. 4 days to wait. 4. "Can I see the evidence you found?" she asked. "Yes, I've printed everything. Where can we meet?" We arranged to meet at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the library in 30 minutes. I gathered my printouts, thanked Margaret for her help, and walked outside into the spring sunshine, mind racing with this new information. My son wasn't just a thief. He was potentially a serial exploiter of vulnerable seniors. How many others had there been before me? How many trusting elderly clients had seen their life savings, their homes, their autonomy stripped away through Richard's machinations? The coffee shop was busy with mid-morning customers when I arrived. I spotted Miss Goldstein at a corner table, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, rather than her professional attire from yesterday. "Less conspicuous this way," she explained as I sat down. "I brought you something." She slid a manila envelope across the table. "A copy of your husband's will that I pulled from probate court records." I thought it might be useful. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Frank's will. I remembered going to our family lawyer, Mr. Grossman, after Frank's diagnosis, ensuring everything was in order. We had mirror wills, everything to the surviving spouse, then split evenly between our children upon the death of the second spouse. But as I scanned the document now, something caught my eye, a clause I didn't remember. Upon the determination that my wife Eleanor is no longer competent to manage her affairs, as certified by 2 physicians, my son Richard shall serve as trustee of all assets with full authority to manage said assets for Eleanor's benefit for the remainder of her life. "This isn't right," I whispered. "This clause, it wasn't in the will Frank and I signed. I would remember something like this." Miss Goldstein's expression grew even more serious. "That's what I suspected. I've seen cases like this before. Documents altered after signing but before filing with the probate court, especially when the signing spouse is deceased and can't contest the changes." "So Richard altered Frank's will after his death? How is that possible?" "Unfortunately, it's more common than you might think. If he had access to the original document before it was filed with the court, he could have made changes, created a new version with a forged signature, and submitted that version instead. Most probate courts don't have the resources to verify every signature." I felt physically ill. So this wasn't an impulsive decision after Frank died. He was planning this even while his father was dying. Miss Goldstein reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Eleanor, I know this is overwhelming, but each piece of evidence strengthens our case. The altered will, the suspicious power of attorney, the house sale coinciding with the purchase of a vacation property, and now the possibility that he's done this to others." I showed her my printouts, the property record for the Martha's Vineyard house, the information about Dr. Whitman, the article about elder fraud at Morgan Stanley. "This is excellent work," she said, reviewing the documents. "Better than what my investigator has found so far. Were you a detective in a former life?" "Third-grade teacher," I replied with a small smile. "You learn to spot lies and follow paper trails." "Well, your detective work has given us more than enough to present to the judge on Monday. I've also arranged for an independent medical evaluation tomorrow with a geriatric specialist who has no connection to Richard or Pine Grove." "What about Pine Grove itself? Won't they have reported me missing by now?" "They have. I received a call from their administrator this morning as your attorney of record from yesterday's visit." I explained that you had left voluntarily and were safe, but declined to reveal your location. They threatened to contact the police, but I reminded them that you haven't been declared legally incompetent by a court, merely placed there under a questionable power of attorney that we're challenging. "They're not happy, but they're waiting to see how the emergency hearing goes on Monday." "And Richard? Does he know I've left?" "Yes. The administrator called him immediately after speaking with me. He's been trying to reach me, but I haven't responded yet. I wanted to talk to you first." I nodded, considering my next steps. "I can't stay at that motel for 4 more days. It's too expensive and Richard might think to look there." "You're welcome to stay with me," Miss Goldstein offered. "I have a guest room, and my apartment building has good security. Richard wouldn't get past the front desk." I was touched by her offer but shook my head. "I don't want to put you in that position professionally, and I need to think, to plan. Is there any way I could get access to my bank accounts? I should have sufficient funds for a few weeks in a decent hotel, if I could just reach them. Without invalidating the power of attorney first, that's difficult. Banks are very strict about these matters." She thought for a moment. "There is one possibility. Do you have any safe deposit boxes that Richard might not know about?" I did. Frank and I had maintained a safe deposit box at Westbrook National Bank for decades. In it, we kept birth certificates, Social Security cards, some jewelry Frank had inherited from his mother, and an emergency cash reserve of $5,000. "Richard knows we have one," I said slowly, "but he doesn't have access to it as far as I know. Frank and I were the only authorized signatories. You would need ID to access it, which is a problem. But I might have a solution for that." She made a quick phone call, speaking in low tones, then turned back to me. "I have a colleague who specializes in elder law. She's willing to accompany you to the bank as your legal representative, with documentation of our petition challenging the power of attorney. It might be enough to convince the bank to grant you access, especially if you've been a long-time customer." It was a gamble, but worth trying. we arranged to meet Miss Goldstein's colleague, Patricia Rivera, at Westbrook National Bank at 2 p.m. The next few hours passed in tense anticipation. I ate lunch at a small diner, keeping my head down, constantly scanning for familiar faces. I was not a criminal, I reminded myself. I had done nothing wrong. Yet I felt like a fugitive in the town where I'd lived most of my adult life. At the bank, Patricia Rivera was waiting for me in the lobby, a commanding presence in a tailored suit, with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a severe bun. She greeted me warmly, then switched to all business as we approached the customer service desk. "I'm Attorney Rivera, representing Eleanor Mitchell. Mrs. Mitchell needs access to her safe deposit box. She has misplaced her ID but can provide her box number and key. I have documentation here showing that Mrs. Mitchell is of sound mind and legally entitled to access her property, despite a contested power of attorney document." The young bank officer looked uncertain, glancing between us and the papers Attorney Rivera presented. "Let me get my manager." The manager, an older man named Mr. Phillips, whom I vaguely recognized from community events, approached with a concerned expression. "Mrs. Mitchell, I heard you'd moved away after Frank passed. Is everything all right?" "No, Mr. Phillips, everything is not all right. My son has placed me in an assisted living facility against my will, claimed I have dementia, which I don't, sold my house without my permission, and taken control of my finances using a fraudulent power of attorney. I need access to my safe deposit box to retrieve some emergency funds and my identification documents." My blunt explanation seemed to take him aback. He looked to Attorney Rivera, who handed him her business card and the court documents. "This is highly irregular," he said, reviewing the papers. "So is elder exploitation," Attorney Rivera replied crisply. "Mrs. Mitchell has been a customer of this bank for over 40 years. She knows her box number and has her key. She can verify personal identifying information. The court has already recognized the validity of our emergency petition by granting a hearing. Denying her access to her own property would be problematic, to say the least." Mr. Phillips considered for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll need to verify some information, Mrs. Mitchell. Your social security number, date of birth, and mother's maiden name." I provided the information correctly. After a few more minutes of deliberation and consulting the bank's records, Mr. Phillips led us to the safe deposit vault. My hands trembled slightly as I inserted the key I'd kept hidden in a small zippered pocket of my handbag, one of the few personal items that had made the journey to Pine Grove with me. The box opened to reveal exactly what I remembered: our important documents, a velvet pouch containing Frank's mother's pearl necklace and diamond earrings, and an envelope marked "Emergency," containing $50 or $100 bills. I took my birth certificate, social security card, passport, expired but still a valid form of identification, and the cash. I hesitated over the jewelry, then decided to take it as well. If things went badly with the court hearing, I might need additional resources. Attorney Rivera watched approvingly. "Good. With these documents, we can start rebuilding your independence, regardless of how Monday's hearing goes." With proper ID now in my possession, we went directly to open a new bank account at a different bank, one where Richard had no connections. I deposited $4,000 of the emergency cash, keeping $1,000 for immediate needs. "What now?" I asked as we left the bank, feeling both empowered and exhausted by the day's events. "Now we prepare for Monday's hearing," Attorney Rivera said. "Miss Goldstein has arranged for you to stay at the Hawthorne Hotel in Salem. It's about 30 minutes from here, far enough that Richard is unlikely to look for you there, but close enough for Monday's court appearance. A car service will take you there shortly." "Salem? As in which trials, Salem?" She smiled slightly. "The very same. It seemed appropriate given the circumstances. A place where women were once persecuted for being difficult or inconvenient. Now it's a charming historical town with excellent security at its best hotel. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. Women declared crazy by those who stood to gain from controlling them, a practice as old as time, merely taking new forms in each era. The car arrived, driven by a professional-looking woman in her 40s, who introduced herself only as Kate. "I'm an associate of Miss Goldstein's," she explained. "Part-time driver, part-time security." The drive to Salem passed in contemplative silence. I watched the familiar landscapes of my life recede, wondering if I would ever return to the town where I'd taught generations of children, where Frank and I had built our life together. Even if I won in court, the house was gone. My home was gone. What would victory even look like now? The Hawthorne Hotel was indeed charming, a red brick colonial building in the heart of historic Salem. Kate escorted me inside and waited while I checked in, paying cash for 3 nights. "Miss Goldstein will meet you here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for the independent medical evaluation," Kate said as she walked me to my room. "Here's another prepaid phone. Different number from the last one, just in case. Miss Goldstein's number is programmed in. Call if you need anything." Left alone in the comfortable but unfamiliar hotel room, I felt the weight of the past 2 days crash down upon me. I sank onto the edge of the bed, hands shaking, tears finally breaking through the determined facade I'd maintained since my escape from Pine Grove. I cried for Frank, who would be heartbroken to see what our son had become. I cried for the home we'd built together, now belonging to strangers. I cried for the betrayal that cut deeper than any physical wound could, to be discarded, declared incompetent, institutionalized by my own child. When the tears subsided, I washed my face with cold water and looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman who looked back had aged in the past few months, lines of stress etched more deeply around her eyes and mouth. But those eyes were clear and determined. I was still Eleanor Mitchell, teacher, mother, survivor. And I would fight. The next morning, Miss Goldstein arrived with Dr. Samira Patel, a distinguished geriatric neurologist from Massachusetts General Hospital. The examination was thorough: cognitive tests, memory assessments, even a portable EEG to measure brain activity. "Mrs. Mitchell," Dr. Patel said after nearly 2 hours of evaluation, "I see absolutely no evidence of dementia or any significant cognitive impairment. Your test results are consistent with a healthy 65-year-old woman with above-average cognitive function for your age group. There are minor memory variations that are entirely normal for your age, but nothing that would justify guardianship or institutionalization." The relief I felt was profound. "Will you testify to that at Monday's hearing?" "I've already prepared my report and will absolutely be there to present my findings to the judge." She paused, her expression troubled. "Mrs. Mitchell, I've seen cases like yours before. They're more common than most people realize. Family members using normal aging processes or grief reactions to justify taking control of an elder's assets. It's a form of abuse that often goes unrecognized because it wears the mask of concern. Thank you, Dr. Patel, not just for the evaluation, but for believing me." The weekend passed with painstaking preparation. Miss Goldstein and I reviewed all our evidence, practiced my testimony, and discussed possible scenarios for Monday's hearing. We learned that Richard had hired a prominent elder law attorney known for aggressive defense of guardianship cases. "He's fighting hard," Miss Goldstein observed, which tells me he knows he's vulnerable. On Sunday evening, I received an unexpected call on the prepaid phone. "Mom, it's Sarah. I'm at Boston Logan." "Just landed." My daughter had come after all. "Sarah, I'm so glad you're here. Where are you staying?" "I haven't decided yet. Richard wants me to stay with him and Diane, but I've been doing some thinking since we last spoke, and some research. I'd like to hear your side of things in person, if that's okay." I gave her the name of my hotel, but suggested she not tell Richard where I was. It's complicated, Sarah. I'll explain everything when I see you. She arrived an hour later, looking tired from travel but alert and concerned. My tall, capable daughter with Frank's eyes and my stubborn chin. We embraced for a long moment in my hotel room doorway. Mom, you look... She studied my face. You look like yourself. Not at all like someone who needs to be in a care facility. That's because I don't need to be in one. I gestured for her to sit. I have a lot to tell you, and it won't be easy to hear. For the next 2 hours, I laid out everything. The night I was taken from my home, the fraudulent power of attorney, the mysterious Dr. Whitman, the sale of the house coinciding with Richard's vacation property purchase, the altered will, and the investigation into Richard's professional conduct. Sarah listened in growing horror, asking occasional clarifying questions, but mostly absorbing the evidence I presented. I spoke to Richard yesterday, she finally said. He told me you'd had some kind of psychotic break, that you'd escaped from Pine Grove and were making wild accusations because of your paranoid delusions. He sounded so convincing, Mom, so concerned. Her voice broke. My own brother. How could he do this? I've been asking myself the same question for months, I said quietly. I still don't have an answer. Sarah reached for my hand. I'm so sorry I doubted you, even for a moment. It's just that Richard has always been the responsible one, the one who handled things back east after I moved to California. I never thought he'd... None of us did. And Sarah, I need you to understand something. Whatever happens tomorrow at the hearing, my relationship with Richard is broken, perhaps irreparably. But he's still your brother. I won't ask you to cut him out of your life. She looked at me incredulously. Mom, he committed fraud. He locked you away and stole your house. How can I ever trust him again? That's for you to decide. But remember that people are complicated, rarely all good or all bad. The brother who taught you to ride a bike and helped you with college applications still exists somewhere inside the man who betrayed me. Just keep that in mind in the years ahead. We talked late into the night, planning for the hearing and beyond. Sarah was adamant that I would come live with her in San Francisco after the court proceedings, at least temporarily until I decided what I wanted to do next. I have a spare bedroom, and the building has an elevator. It's close to Golden Gate Park for walks. You always said you wanted to see California someday. Not like this. I thought, but didn't say. Not as a refugee from my own life. But I nodded, grateful for the offer and for her unwavering support, now that she understood the truth. Monday morning arrived bright and clear. I dressed carefully in clothes Sarah had purchased for me the previous evening. A conservative navy dress and matching blazer that conveyed both competence and dignity. Miss Goldstein, Attorney Rivera, and Dr. Patel met us at the courthouse. Richard was already there with his attorney, a sharp-faced man in an expensive suit. When Richard saw Sarah beside me, his face registered shock, then anger, then a carefully composed, neutral expression. Sarah, you don't understand what's happening, he began, approaching us in the hallway outside the courtroom. Mom needs help, proper care. Save it for the judge, Richard. Sarah cut him off coldly. I've seen the evidence. The Martha's Vineyard property you bought with the proceeds from Mom's house? Nice touch. His face paled. That's not... You don't... Mr. Mitchell, Miss Goldstein interjected smoothly. I suggest you consult with your attorney before saying anything further that might complicate your already precarious legal position. Inside the courtroom, Judge Harriet Chen, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, called the emergency hearing to order. She reviewed the petition challenging the power of attorney and guardianship, then looked up over her reading glasses. This is a troubling case. Before hearing arguments, I want to be clear about what we're addressing today. Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell alleges that her son, Richard Mitchell, obtained fraudulent power of attorney over her affairs, falsely claimed she was mentally incompetent, placed her in an assisted living facility against her will, and sold her home without proper authorization. These are serious allegations. She turned to Richard's attorney. "Counselor, your response?" The attorney, Mr. Denton, stood. "Your Honor, this is a sad case of a mother suffering from cognitive decline who cannot accept her limitations. Mr. Mitchell has acted solely out of concern for his mother's well-being. The power of attorney was properly executed and witnessed. Mrs. Mitchell's condition was assessed by a qualified physician who determined she could no longer safely live independently. The house sale was legal and necessary to fund her ongoing care." Judge Chen turned to Ms. Goldstein. "And your evidence contradicting these claims?" Ms. Goldstein presented our case methodically. The altered will, the suspicious timing of the house sale and vacation property purchase. Dr. Patel's medical evaluation showing no cognitive impairment, evidence that Dr. Whitman shared an office building with Richard and had never been my regular physician, and preliminary information about the investigation into Richard's handling of other elderly clients' affairs. Throughout the presentation, I watched Richard's face. He maintained a mask of concern, occasionally shaking his head in apparent sadness at my delusions. But when Miss Goldstein mentioned the internal Morgan Stanley investigation, I saw a flash of genuine fear in his eyes. Judge Chen questioned both attorneys thoroughly, then called me to testify. As I took the stand, I felt a surprising calm. This was my moment to reclaim my voice, my autonomy, my life. "Mrs. Mitchell," the judge said, "please tell the court, in your own words, what has happened to you." I spoke clearly and directly, describing the night I was taken from my home while sedated, the confusion of waking in Pine Grove, the gradual understanding of what Richard had done, and my escape with Miss Goldstein's help. I described finding the property records for the Martha's Vineyard house and the altered clause in Frank's will. "Your Honor," I concluded, "I'm not perfect. I'm 65 years old. Sometimes I forget where I put my reading glasses or take a wrong turn driving, but I am of sound mind. I deserve the dignity of making my own choices, even if those choices sometimes include mistakes. What my son did wasn't protection, it was theft. Not just of my property, but of my personhood." Richard's attorney cross-examined me aggressively, trying to catch me in contradictions or confusion. He failed. My mind was clear, my memories precise, my responses measured even when provoked. When Richard took the stand, he maintained his narrative of filial concern. "I love my mother," he said, his voice breaking theatrically. "After Dad died, she just changed, became forgetful, paranoid sometimes. Left the stove on once. It could have burned the house down. The doctor said it would only get worse. I was trying to protect her." "And the Martha's Vineyard property purchased just after selling your mother's house?" Ms. Goldstein asked during cross-examination. "Was that also for her protection?" Richard flushed. "That was an investment opportunity that happened to come up at the same time. The timing is unfortunate but coincidental. The funds from Mom's house are in a separate account for her care. Can you provide records of this account?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I would need to consult my financial records." "Your Honor," Miss Goldstein interjected, "we request an immediate freeze on all assets derived from the sale of Mrs. Mitchell's home, pending a full accounting." Judge Chen nodded. "So ordered." Dr. Patel testified next, presenting her findings of my cognitive health in clear, professional terms. Mrs. Mitchell shows no signs of dementia or any impairment that would justify guardianship. In my professional opinion, she is fully capable of managing her own affairs and making her own decisions. When Dr. Whitman took the stand, his testimony quickly unraveled under Miss Goldstein's questioning. He admitted to evaluating me only once for less than 30 minutes, acknowledged his office was in Richard's building, and conceded that he had a professional relationship with Richard involving referrals of other elderly clients. By mid-afternoon, Judge Chen had heard enough. Based on the evidence presented, I am issuing an immediate order invalidating the power of attorney held by Richard Mitchell over Eleanor Mitchell. I find no credible evidence of cognitive impairment that would justify guardianship. Mrs. Mitchell is to be restored to full legal control of her own affairs, effective immediately. She turned to Richard, her expression stern. Mr. Mitchell, there are serious questions about your actions that go beyond the scope of today's emergency hearing. I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for potential criminal investigation regarding elder abuse, fraud, and misappropriation of funds. I am also issuing a temporary freeze on the Martha's Vineyard property pending further investigation. Richard's face had gone ashen. His attorney leaned over, whispering urgently in his ear. Additionally, Judge Chen continued, I am ordering a full accounting of all funds derived from the sale of Mrs. Mitchell's house and any other assets over which Mr. Mitchell exercised control. This accounting is to be completed and submitted to the court within 10 business days. She turned to me, her expression softening slightly. Mrs. Mitchell, while today's ruling restores your legal autonomy, I recognize that material harm has been done. Your home has been sold and you have been displaced. The court will address appropriate remedies in subsequent proceedings. For now, is there anything immediate you wish to request? I considered for a moment. Your Honor, I would like access to my bank accounts and personal property that remain at my son's home. Family photographs, keepsakes, items of sentimental value. So ordered. Mr. Mitchell is to provide access to Mrs. Mitchell and a court-appointed observer to retrieve her personal belongings within 48 hours. And all financial institutions are hereby notified that Mrs. Mitchell has sole authority over her accounts. As the hearing concluded, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, vindication, relief, lingering anger, and a profound sadness. I had won, but at what cost? My home was gone. My relationship with my son was shattered. The life I had known had been irreparably altered. Outside the courtroom, Richard approached, his attorney at his side attempting to pull him away. Mom, he began, his voice low and urgent. You don't understand what you've done. The DA's office. They could file criminal charges. I understand exactly what I've done, Richard. The question is whether you understand what you did to your own mother. I was trying to protect you, he insisted. But the words rang hollow, even to his own ears, I could tell. Things just got complicated. Complicated. I repeated the word, tasting its inadequacy. Is that what you call stealing my home and my freedom? Complicated? Sarah stepped forward, placing herself slightly between us. Richard, I think you should go now. Your attorney is right. You shouldn't be talking to Mom without counsel present. He looked at his sister, betrayal in his eyes. You believe her delusions over me? Your own brother? What I believe, Sarah said evenly, is the evidence, the property records, the bank statements, the medical evaluation. Go home, Richard, to your wife, to your new vacation house bought with stolen money. Just go. He turned and walked away, shoulders slumped in defeat, or perhaps just the absence of the need to maintain his facade of concern. In the days that followed, I retrieved my personal belongings from Richard's house. Family photo albums, Frank's watch collection that he'd planned to leave to Richard someday, my grandmother's china, books, and mementos accumulated over a lifetime. The court-appointed observer ensured Richard didn't interfere, though he remained sullenly in his home office during the process. With the power of attorney invalidated, I regained access to my bank accounts, though they were significantly depleted. The investigation revealed that Richard had transferred substantial sums to his personal accounts, beyond just the house proceeds. The district attorney's office filed criminal charges for elder abuse and fraud, But I found little satisfaction in this. My son would likely face jail time, his professional reputation ruined. It was justice, perhaps, but not healing. Sarah and I flew to San Francisco as planned. Her apartment was sunny and modern, with views of the city's famous hills from the living room windows. She had converted her home office into a comfortable bedroom for me, buying a new mattress and bedding in my favorite colors. "It's temporary," she assured me as she showed me around. "Just until you decide what you want to do next. No pressure." I appreciated her kindness, her effort to give me back some sense of choice and control. But the truth was, I didn't know what I wanted next to be. At 65, I had expected to be living out my retirement in the home Frank and I had shared, tending my garden, volunteering at the local library, eventually welcoming grandchildren for holidays and summers. That future had been stolen, not just by Richard's actions, but by Frank's death, by time's relentless march forward. In California, I slowly began rebuilding. I joined a grief support group, not just for Frank now, but for all I had lost. I explored the city with Sarah on weekends, finding unexpected joy in discovering new places, new tastes, new vistas. I volunteered at a literacy program teaching adults to read, finding purpose in using my teaching skills again. The legal proceedings continued from a distance. Richard accepted a plea deal, avoiding jail time but receiving 5 years probation, community service, and permanent revocation of his financial advisor licenses. He was ordered to make full restitution, the house proceeds plus the amounts he had siphoned from my accounts. With interest. The money would come back eventually, but some things could not be restored. The home where Frank and I had built our life together, the unquestioning trust in family, the belief that growing old meant being cared for, not exploited. 6 months after moving to San Francisco, I found a small apartment of my own in the same neighborhood as Sarah. Not a house with a garden, but a bright third-floor walk-up with a bay window perfect for houseplants and a view of a small park where children played. I furnished it simply but comfortably with items that held no painful memories. A fresh start. Deanne filed for divorce from Richard, claiming she had known nothing about his fraudulent activities. Whether that was true or not, I couldn't say. The Martha's Vineyard property was sold to pay part of the restitution owed to me. Sarah suggested I might want to use some of the restitution money to buy a new house, perhaps in California. "You could have a garden again, Mom. Maybe not exactly like your old one, but something new." I considered it, but ultimately decided against it, at least for now. "I'm not ready to put down those kinds of roots again," I told her. "I need time to figure out who Eleanor Mitchell is now, in this new chapter." A year to the day after waking up disoriented in Pine Grove, I sat in my bay window in San Francisco, watching the fog roll in over the city. My phone rang, a Massachusetts number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is Margaret Simmons from the Westbrook Public Library. I hope you don't mind me calling. Sarah gave me your number when she was in town last month." "Margaret, of course. It's lovely to hear from you. How are things in Westbrook?" "That's actually why I'm calling. The library board is launching a new literacy program for seniors, and we're looking for a program coordinator. Someone with teaching experience, someone who understands both education and the unique needs of older adults. I immediately thought of you." "Margaret, I'm in California now. I know, and I understand if you're settled there, but the position includes housing, the apartment above the library that used to be the caretaker's residence. It's been renovated recently. Small but charming, right in the center of town." I was silent, considering the unexpected offer. Return to Westbrook. The town held both wonderful memories and painful ones now. Could I go back without being consumed by what I had lost? "You don't have to decide right away," Margaret continued. "The position doesn't start until September. But we'd love to have you back, Eleanor. The community misses you." And if I may speak personally, I think there would be something poetic about you helping others find their voice through literacy after having to fight so hard for your own voice to be heard. After we hung up, I sat for a long time watching the fog transform the familiar landscape of my new life into something mysterious, liminal, full of possibilities not yet defined. In that moment of transformation, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel again. Hope. Not for a return to what was, but for something new yet rooted in who I had always been, a teacher, a survivor, a woman with wisdom to share. The last thing I had heard that fateful night was, "Let's take her while she's sleeping." Words meant to diminish me, to render me passive, invisible. But I had awakened, not just from medication-induced sleep, but from the comfortable assumptions of a life where family meant safety, where aging meant respect. I had awakened to a harder truth, that vulnerability can be exploited by those closest to us, that systems designed to protect the elderly can be weaponized against them, that the journey into later life requires vigilance along with wisdom. But I had also awakened to my own strength, to the power of allies like Maria and Miss Goldstein, to the capacity for new beginnings even after devastating loss. The documents that had once been used to imprison me, the falsified power of attorney, the altered will, the dubious medical assessment, had ultimately led to truth and justice, however imperfect. I picked up my phone and called Sarah. "I've just had an interesting offer," I began, watching the fog begin to recede, revealing the city once more, familiar yet somehow new in the changing light. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.